When my parents divorced, I was too young to understand the full impact of what was happening. I only knew that things had suddenly changed. My father wasn't there anymore, and my mother told me he had abandoned us. She painted him as a man who didn't care about us, and for years, I believed her. The happy memories of my father faded as I clung to her version of the story. I remember the early days after the divorce as being a blur. I missed my father terribly, but I didn't know how to express it. I'd watch him walk out the door, and everything would change. My mother told me he wasn't a good man, that he wasn't reliable or trustworthy. Those words sank into my mind, and for a long time, I accepted them without question. My world revolved around my mother, who was now my only anchor, and Russell, her friend, who became a frequent visitor. Russell was always there to comfort us, and my mother grew closer to him. I didn't fully understand their relationship, but I felt it. They made me believe that my father was unworthy of my love, and I began to drift further from the man I once adored. I never realized how deeply I had been affected by their words until much later, when the truth started to surface. As I grew older, the doubts began to creep in. The stories my mother and Russell told me about my father never quite added up. For years, I had believed them. Believed that my father was a reckless man who didn't care about me, a man who was unworthy of my love. But as I looked back on the memories I had of him, the warm moments we shared, the way he made me feel safe and loved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I knew there had to be more to the story. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old box hidden in the attic that everything started to change. I opened it, and inside were stacks of letters, each one written by my father. The words in those letters shocked me. They spoke of love, regret, and a longing to reconnect. I had never known that he had tried so many times to reach out to me. Each letter was filled with hope, promises, and a deep desire to be part of my life. Even though he couldn't be there physically, he wasn't the man my mother and Russell had made him out to be. The truth was finally coming to light, and I realized I had been lied to all these years. The pain of the betrayal was overwhelming, but it also gave me the courage to search for the truth. I had to know why my father had been kept away from me, and I couldn't allow myself to live in the shadows of those lies anymore. Reading my father's letters felt like stepping into another life, one I was meant to have, but had been stolen from me. The words he wrote weren't just about missing me. They were full of memories of our time together before the divorce. He described the way I used to giggle when he lifted me onto his shoulders, how I insisted on bringing my stuffed rabbit everywhere, even to the grocery store. His memories matched my own, memories I hadn't dared trust for years. I began to question everything. Why had I forgotten these moments? Had I buried them to protect myself? Or had I let my mother and Russell rewrite them with lies? I dug through old boxes in the attic and drawers in my room, searching for anything that might connect me to those lost years. And then I found them. Photographs. In one, I was sitting on my dad's lap, grinning ear to ear, his arms wrapped tightly around me. We both looked happy. Not the way Mom described him. Not like a man who didn't care. I realized I hadn't forgotten him. He had been erased from my life. My mother and Russell didn't just tell lies. They removed evidence, replaced warm memories with cold warnings, and convinced me that love was danger and distance was protection. But now, holding those photos and letters, I knew I had to find the full truth, for myself and for the version of me that had been silenced. I never expected to see him again, at least not like that. It had been 10 years since I last saw my father, and by then, the lines between memory and imagination had blurred. But when I woke up in the hospital after the accident, dazed and in pain, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a decade. A soft, trembling, familiar voice. "Lily?" I turned my head, and there he was. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. The years had changed him. His hair was streaked with gray, and there were lines on his face that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were the same, deep, warm, and filled with a love I thought I'd imagined. My throat tightened. I could barely whisper, "Dad?" I hadn't called anyone that in so long. The word felt strange but natural. He looked like he was about to cry. I wanted to reach out, but my body ached. Still, he stayed there, eyes locked on mine, like he was memorizing my face after so many lost years. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: safe. My mother tried to interfere, pulling him away with cold words and sharp looks. But the hospital had called him. He was still listed as my emergency contact. Despite everything, I had written his number down on a form weeks earlier without knowing why. Maybe just hoping. And now, he was here. Not as a ghost of the past, but as the only person in that room who truly looked at me like I mattered. It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had. After the accident, after seeing my father again, I knew I couldn't keep quiet anymore. We sat in the hospital room, just the two of us. The beeping of machines was the only sound between us for a while. Then he looked at me, not with pity but with patience, and asked gently, "Has Russell ever hurt you?" I hesitated, my eyes fixed on the IV line in my arm. For years, I had been told to stay silent, to never speak badly of Russell. My mother said he had a temper, but he only got angry because I was difficult. I had believed that maybe it was my fault. But now, with my father here, calm, steady, I felt safe for the first time in a long time. So I nodded. I told him about the time Russell grabbed my arm so hard it bruised, about the yelling, the slamming doors, the cold silence when I cried. I told him how I used to hide in my closet when things got too loud. My father didn't interrupt. He just listened. And I could see the rage in his eyes, not the kind that frightened me, but the kind that said he would never let it happen again. He held my hand and said softly, "Thank you for telling me." That moment changed everything. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice, my safety, my right to be heard. Once the truth came out, things moved quickly, but not easily. My father immediately contacted a lawyer. Child Protective Services got involved after the doctors documented the bruises on my arms and noted Russell's behavior. For the first time in my life, adults were actually listening to me. But Russell and my mother didn't back down. They fought back, hard. They claimed I was making it all up, said I had been brainwashed by my father, that he manipulated me into lying. Their lawyer tried to paint me as an emotional, confused teenager. It was like being erased all over again. But this time, I had my father by my side. He never missed a single hearing. He answered every question, stayed calm, and defended me with everything he had. The courtroom was tense. Some days I was terrified they'd win again, that they'd send me back to the same house, the same silence, the same pain. But then I'd look over and see my dad sitting there, eyes locked on mine. And I'd remember why I spoke up in the first place. This wasn't just about where I would live, it was about who I believed I was, and who I wanted to become. My father gave me the strength to keep fighting, even when it hurt. I wasn't just his daughter in court. I was finally my own voice. Once the truth came out, things moved quickly, but not. During the legal battle, there was a moment when my father and I sat together, just the two of us, outside the courthouse. The day had been long, full of testimony and tension. I asked him quietly, "Why didn't you fight harder back then? Why did you let them take me?" He didn't dodge the question. He looked me in the eye and said, "Because I was broken. I made mistakes. I didn't know how to protect you back then, but I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second." He told me about the guilt he carried, how the betrayal from his best friend and my mother crushed him, how he drowned in alcohol for a while, thinking he had failed me. But even through the darkest years, he still wrote to me, still hoped I'd one day know the truth. That conversation changed something in me. He wasn't perfect. He had flaws, just like anyone else. But he was here now, fighting with everything he had, not for revenge, but for me, for us. And that meant more than any perfect past ever could. When the court finally allowed me to live with my father, it didn't feel real at first. His apartment wasn't big or fancy. It was quiet, modest, and filled with books, music, and the smell of home-cooked food. But most of all, it was safe. It was ours. He gave me the spare bedroom and let me pick the paint color. We hung up some of my childhood photos together, and even though the room was simple, it felt like a beginning. Each day was a step into something new. We cooked dinner together, watched old movies, laughed about awkward memories, and slowly filled the space with warmth. For the first time in years, I didn't have to flinch at loud footsteps or pretend everything was okay. I didn't have to choose my words carefully to avoid someone's anger. My father didn't expect me to be perfect. He just wanted me to feel safe, to heal, to be myself again. It wasn't just a new home, it was a new chapter. One where I could breathe, grow, and trust again. Not everyone turned their back on me. When I thought I had no one, Emma, my best friend, proved me wrong. She was the first person I ever told about the bruises. The first person who didn't say I was overreacting or making things up. Emma listened, believed me, and more importantly, she protected me. When I found my father's letters in the attic, I didn't feel safe keeping them at home, so I gave them to Emma. She hid them in her room, guarded them like they were sacred, and when things exploded, when the truth came out, she stood up for me without hesitation. Her mother did too. They opened their door to investigators, told them what they'd seen, what they knew. They didn't owe me anything, but they gave me everything I needed: proof, support, belief. In the middle of chaos, Emma reminded me that the truth doesn't always have to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to stand beside it. Winning the case wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Living with my father gave me peace, but healing wasn't instant. There were nights I'd wake up expecting anger, flinching at sudden sounds. But over time, those fears faded. With every quiet dinner, every silly joke, every safe hug, I remembered what it felt like to just be a daughter. Then one day, my mother called. Her voice cracked as she apologized for the lies, for choosing Russell, for not protecting me. I didn't forgive her right away, but I listened. I was ready to stop carrying her mistakes like they were mine. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the pain so it doesn't control me. I'll never forget the girl who was scared to speak, but I'll always honor the girl who finally did. And my father? He never gave up on me, not once. That's the kind of love that builds futures.